Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're setting off on a peaceful little nightmare called the Silk Road, a sprawling ancient death march disguised as a trade route. You've probably heard it romanticised. Camels silhouetted against golden dunes, merchants swapping silk and spices beneath lantern-lit tents. But let's be clear, this wasn't some majestic journey of cultural enlightenment. It was thousands of miles of heatstroke, frostbite, robbery, starvation, and camel spit. The Silk Road didn't care about your exotic dreams. It cared about whether you'd make a good skeleton for some future explorer to trip over. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these history bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's listening from around the world. Now dim the lights, settle into your sheets, and as your body relaxes, allow your mind to drift somewhere far less forgiving, across a landscape of political backstabbing, violent terrain, and fermented mare's milk. So you've decided to become a Silk Road merchant. That's adorable. Maybe you're in it for the money, dreaming of silks, spices, and a future where your children can afford shoes. Or maybe you're running from something. Debt, disgrace, or a mildly inconvenient execution warrant. Either way, you've slapped together a caravan of irritable camels, hired a few travel companions, whose backgrounds you probably should have investigated more thoroughly, and pointed yourself toward a city you can't pronounce on a map you definitely traced from someone else's. Congratulations, you've just committed yourself to one of the most dangerous, physically exhausting, logistically catastrophic undertakings in the pre-modern world. And you're doing it in wool, in summer, in the desert. Let's talk time frame. You're not just anywhere in history, you're in the year 1260 CE, a banner year for chaos and commerce. The Mongol Empire is at its sprawling, blood-soaked peak, stretching from China to Hungary, under the dubious blessing of Kublai Khan and various other Genghis-adjacent family members. The empire has ushered in what scholars like to call the Pax Mongolica, a term which implies peace, but really just means you're less likely to be murdered by random bandits and more likely to be murdered by organised ones with official tax permits. Trade is booming, roads are mostly intact, and you, poor soul, have chosen this exact moment to join the caravan ranks with no diplomatic protection and a stomach that still can't handle goat milk. If you're picturing the Silk Road as a single grand highway, a cobbled ribbon stretching from Xi'an to Constantinople, disabuse yourself of that fantasy immediately. It's not a road, it's a network, a mess, a sprawling tangle of branching paths, crumbling mountain trails, and drifting desert crossings that stretch over 4,000 miles depending on how often you get lost. Some routes veer north through the steppe, others cut south along the edges of Persia. None are easy, all are unforgiving. The maps are vague, the weather is fatal, and every major turn is based on advice from someone who definitely made it once and now lives in a hut with no teeth. You won't be travelling alone, of course. That would be suicidal. You'll join a caravan, a loosely cooperative collection of merchants' animals, hired muscle, translators, spiritual advisors, and probably one guy who just won't stop coughing. Safety in numbers, they say, but also disease, theft, interpersonal tension, and the high likelihood of someone stealing your boots while you sleep. You'll want to choose your companions wisely. That said, most of them will be strangers, and some of them will hate you the moment you open your mouth. Cultural misunderstandings are the backbone of Silk Road interactions. A bad joke in one dialect could be blasphemy in another, and you won't know until someone throws a rock. Why are you doing this again? Ah yes, trade. You're bringing silks from China, or maybe spices from India, or gold from the West, or glassware, or paper, or anything else valuable enough to risk your intestines on the local cooking. These goods are luxury items worth small fortunes in foreign markets. Of course, the moment you get there, you'll realise the local demand has cratered and your spices are mouldy. Also, that glassware? Broken. The camels fell, they always do. Let's not romanticise this. Modern depictions of the Silk Road tend to gloss over the parts where people died. A lot. You weren't Marco Polo. You were Marco probably didn't make it out of Khotan. You weren't weaving noble alliances between East and West. You were trying to make a profit in an environment that actively wanted you dead. From the terrain, the climate, the diseases, the politics, and the simple mechanical failure of your own wobbly knees after walking 10 hours a day for 7 straight weeks. The Silk Road wasn't a bridge between civilizations. It was a gauntlet. A long, dusty, disease-ridden relay race where the prize was living long enough to be robbed in a different language. Oh, and don't expect inns. Sure, there were caravanserais, large roadside complexes, built to offer shelter and basic safety. Think of them as medieval truck stops without the convenience or the hygiene. They were scattered and sparse. You'd be lucky to see one every 100 miles. In between, you sleep under the stars, which sounds poetic, until the wind picks up and fills your nose with sand. Then your camel starts screaming because it heard wolves. Then the wolves arrive. Then you remember you're carrying saffron worth more than your life, and you have 0 upper body strength. Sweet dreams. The truth is, you're entering a world that does not care if you succeed. It doesn't even care if you make it. The Silk Road chewed up veterans. It shredded the unprepared. It left trails of bones and stories behind, both of which will be heavily exaggerated by the survivors, none of whom will mention how often they cried on the 3rd night in the desert. But hey, maybe you'll beat the odds. Maybe you'll be clever, cautious, lucky. Or maybe you'll be just nutritious enough for something in the mountains to find you tasty. You're here now though. You've got your cargo. Your camels are glaring at you, and the long, slow crawl into historical misery is just beginning. Time to step out onto the road, trader. Try not to die too early. It ruins the pacing. Before you can die in the desert, you first have to pack for it, and that's where the fun begins. The thing about preparing for the Silk Road is that you're not just packing for a trip. You're packing for several different ways to suffer. Every item you choose must serve at least 3 purposes: trade value, survival, and not killing you by accident. That beautiful bolt of brocade? It also needs to double as a sunshade and a burial shroud, depending on how the week goes. Those dried apricots, hopefully nutritious, probably just decorative. Definitely going to melt in your bag and ferment into something you'll pretend is wine when morale hits rock bottom. First, the animals. Camels are non-negotiable. Horses are too soft for the terrain, and mules have the stamina of a baked potato. You need Bactrian camels, the ones with 2 humps, a bad attitude, and the ability to survive off thorny weeds and pure spite. Each camel can carry roughly 400 pounds, but you'll need to balance that load carefully. Too much weight, and it'll sit down in protest. Too little, and it'll spend the whole day trying to chase butterflies. Your camels are your lifeline, your transportation, your mobile storage unit, and the only living thing on this trip less enthusiastic about it than you are. They also scream, not metaphorically. They actually scream, loudly, often in your face. Then there's your team. You're not doing this alone, unless you have a death wish and no one to inherit your debts. You'll need a guide who knows the land, the languages, and which rivers are full of bandits, pretending to be toll collectors. You'll also need translators, like plural, because you'll be moving through a kaleidoscope of cultures and dialects. One wrong inflection could turn good morning into I slept with your goat. And that's a hard diplomatic hole to crawl out of. You may want to hire guards as well, assuming you can afford it. The problem is that armed men with nothing to lose have a tendency to switch employers mid-journey, usually to the side with more money or fewer rules about stabbing. Now for the trade goods. What are you carrying, merchant? Silk is always in demand if you can get your hands on it. Spices too, especially things like cinnamon, saffron and cloves, all of which are light, valuable, and almost guaranteed to leak into your socks. Gems are a safe bet, as long as they're real, which they probably aren't. Paper, porcelain, tea, lapis lazuli, the list is endless and mostly unobtainable. And don't forget, you'll need samples to show along the way, because everyone wants to haggle without actually buying. You'll be unpacking and repacking your goods so many times, you'll develop a permanent squatting posture and the lower back of a man 30 years older. Then comes the survival gear. You'll need water skins, lots of them. Not because they're reliable, but because most of them will tear, rot, or mysteriously vanish when you're halfway between oases. Food, dried meat, flatbread, raisins, maybe some barley you can cook into porridge when morale dips low enough. You'll also carry cooking pots, fire-starting tools, and spices, not to impress your caravan mates, but to try and make dried goat taste like something other than regret. And don't forget spare boots, needles and thread, tent fabric, and enough rope to fashion a makeshift pulley system, a shelter, or depending on how bad things get, a noose. Medicine is a delicate subject. There isn't much of it, and most of it doesn't work. You'll carry herbal poultices, maybe some dried scorpion powder if your apothecary is creative, and a few charms blessed by monks, priests, or whatever holy man you could find on short notice. You're not sure if any of it works, but when your stomach starts doing somersaults in the middle of the Gobi, you'll pray to every deity you've ever heard of and swallow anything that doesn't scream on the way down. But don't forget the bribes. You'll need coins, copper for the commoners, silver for the gatekeepers, gold for the guards who pretend not to notice when you skip the quarantine inspection. You'll need small luxury items too. Glass beads, colourful cloth, maybe a dagger with decorative etching. These are not optional. Every town, every checkpoint, every local strongman with an ego and a sword will expect tribute. And if you don't pay, you'll either be detained, robbed, or enthusiastically flogged for offending regional dignity. You'll also need gifts for other traders, officials, even innkeepers. Never assume a transaction is done just because you paid the first time. By now, your packs are groaning, your camels are glaring, and your purse is weeping. You've already spent more money preparing for this journey than you'll probably make by completing it. And you haven't even left yet, but it's too late to back out. Your goods are packed, your guides are impatient, and your pride is louder than your common sense. Besides, how bad could it really be? You look at the horizon, at the endless stretch of dirt and sky, and take a deep breath. It smells like dust, camel sweat, and distant anxiety. You mount your ride, secure your saddlebags, and give the signal to move. Ahead of you lies 1,000 ways to die. Behind you lies the life you couldn't stand. Welcome to the journey. You're officially packed for the apocalypse. The sun hasn't even risen yet, and already your camel is trying to bite you. Not playfully, not affectionately, just pure, unfiltered malice wrapped in fur. You're quickly learning that Bactrian camels, despite being the heavy lifters of the Silk Road, are not grateful for the opportunity. They are surly, stubborn, loud, and smell like someone fermented an old rug in a vat of goat milk. They also have the emotional range of a wet sock, until you try to load them, at which point they unleash a noise somewhere between a scream and a death rattle. Welcome to your new reality. The camel hates you, and if you're honest, the feeling is starting to be mutual. Once the camel finishes insulting your ancestors, you're off. A caravan on the Silk Road doesn't move like an army or a parade. It lurches, slowly, unevenly, like an exhausted centipede held together by twine and anxiety. Your pace is dictated by the weakest animal, the worst terrain, and the most unpredictable weather. A good day means 20 to 25 miles of progress. A bad day means turning around to dig a wheel out of a sinkhole, or waiting for a sandstorm to stop exfoliating the skin off your face. You travel in a group, but don't mistake that for companionship. The caravan is a collection of self-interested strangers held together by mutual need and the vague threat of wolves. There are merchants like you, drivers, guides, cooks, translators, maybe a monk or two hoping for protection in numbers. You all eat separately, you sleep separately, you gossip together. The closest thing to unity you'll find is during mealtime, when everyone agrees the stew tastes like boot water and someone should probably check if the cook is even trying any more. Navigation is a collaborative exercise in guesswork. You follow the stars at night and the bones of less fortunate travellers by day. If you're lucky, you've hired a guide who's actually been here before and isn't just making confident-sounding declarations like, "We turn left at the big rock," when there are 17 identical rocks in every direction. There are maps, of course, hand-drawn nightmares that are equal parts speculation and creative optimism. You learn quickly that most routes weren't designed for efficiency. They were designed around things that might kill you slightly less quickly. The rhythm of the day is a mix of monotony and mild dread. You rise before the sun, pack your gear, coax your camel into motion, and walk, for hours, through wind and dust and temperatures that can swing 40 degrees between morning and night. You try not to think too hard. Thinking leads to noticing how your boots are rubbing your feet raw or how your lips are cracking like old parchment. You hum, maybe, recite prayers in 3 languages, count the flies on the rear end of the camel in front of you, anything to ignore the creeping realization that you're only on day 5 of what might be a 3-month journey. When the sun begins to set, you stop. Camp is a fluid concept. Sometimes it's a sheltered clearing by a stream. Sometimes it's just a patch of rock that looks slightly less murderous than the others. If you're fortunate, you find a caravan serai, a kind of medieval rest stop built to house travellers, their animals, and the germs they brought with them. These are large enclosed courtyards with rooms around the perimeter. You might get a place to sleep off the ground, a bowl of stew, and a chance to hear 3 different origin stories for the same merchant scar. Caravanserais are the social hubs of the Silk Road, where news, goods, and bacteria are exchanged with equal enthusiasm. But even the relative safety of a caravanserai doesn't guarantee rest. The walls might protect you from raiders, but not from the guy 2 mats over who snores like a dying ox, or the infestation of fleas that arrived with the fur trader from the north. You lie awake some nights, listening to unfamiliar languages echoing through the walls, wondering if that cough in the corner is just the cold or something that'll end your career early. Eventually, you drift off, not into real sleep, but into a kind of blinking trance that counts as rest, only because you're too tired to argue with your own biology. Then it's morning again. Your back aches from sleeping on what felt like a burlap sack filled with gravel. Your hands are swollen from gripping the reins, and your camel is already foaming at the mouth in protest because you looked at it wrong. You eat a breakfast that tastes like compressed sadness, check that no one stole your boots, and haul yourself back into formation. The desert waits, so do the mountains, and the storms, and the next town with guards who think your perfectly legal cinnamon smells like contraband. This is the heartbeat of the Silk Road. Long stretches of silence, discomfort, and repetition, punctuated by bursts of fear or frustration. The road doesn't want to kill you quickly. It wants to wear you down, grind your spirit into dust over the course of endless trudging days and restless flea-bitten nights. And it's working. Your boots are thinning. Your patience is fraying. Your camel has started making eye contact when it spits. This is your life now. Welcome to the journey. There's something especially unnerving about a place whose name translates, more or less, to "go in and you won't come out." The Taklamakan Desert doesn't try to hide what it is. There are no poetic metaphors or misleading travel brochures. Just an open, sun-bleached graveyard of wind-polished bones and bad decisions. And now, thanks to your equally poor decision-making skills, you're about to walk right into it. Your guides look grim, your camels look unimpressed, and you're already thirsty. Stretching over 130,000 square miles in what is now Western China, the Taklamakan is one of the largest, driest, and most deliberately unwelcoming deserts on Earth. It's a basin of death surrounded by jagged mountain ranges and haunted caravan legends. For Silk Road travellers, it is the gauntlet between oasis cities, a howling void of heat and silence where the earth has nothing to offer except regret. There were routes that skirted the northern and southern edges, clinging desperately to strings of oases like drunks holding onto lampposts. But even those safe routes could turn fatal if the wind shifted or your water ran low, which it often did. The sand here isn't soft and picturesque. It's fine, aggressive, and omnipresent. It gets into everything. Your ears, your eyes, your food, your soul. It finds the smallest openings in your clothes and proceeds to exfoliate your skin into submission. You spend most of the day squinting and blinking, chewing on grit that wasn't in your mouth an hour ago. Even when the wind isn't blowing, and it usually is, the heat radiates off the ground in shimmering waves that make every distant hill look like a mirage, and every mirage look like salvation. You begin to suspect that your camel is hallucinating too, because it just spent 10 minutes trying to walk toward a rock that doesn't exist. And then, of course, there are the storms. Sandstorms in the Taklamakan don't arrive with warning. They just appear, like a punishment from a god you forgot to bribe. The sky goes yellow, then grey, then brown, and then disappears entirely. The wind starts screaming, louder than the camels, which is impressive, and visibility drops to nothing. You pull your scarf over your mouth and try to remember which direction was forward. The sand cuts your face like 1,000 tiny knives. Your caravan stumbles forward in blind, slow-motion chaos. By the time the storm passes, you've lost feeling in your lips, one of your water skins, and probably your sense of optimism. The Taklamakan is also a graveyard, quite literally. Archaeologists have found remarkably well-preserved mummies here, their bodies desiccated by the dry air and shallow burials. And while that might fascinate scholars, it should concern you, because for every mummy with a museum display, there were dozens more who didn't even get a proper burial. You'll sometimes find bones scattered in the sand, travellers who didn't make it to the next oasis, left where they fell because digging in this terrain is a waste of time and effort. If you're lucky, your caravan will mutter a prayer and keep moving. If you're not, someone might take your gear before the sand does. To make things even more cheerful, the Taklamakan is laced with legends. Ancient travellers spoke of spirits that haunted the dunes, voices in the wind calling your name, shadowy figures glimpsed in the heat haze, strange lights dancing just beyond reach. Were they hallucinations brought on by dehydration and sunstroke? Probably, but it doesn't matter, because when you're stumbling half-conscious under the weight of your pack, your brain is happy to supply demons, anything to explain the gnawing feeling that something is watching you, just over the next ridge. And then there's the cold. Yes, cold. You might think a desert only knows how to burn, but the Taklamakan is generous in its cruelty. At night, the heat disappears in minutes. The wind becomes icy, and your sweat turns to frost against your skin. You'll try to sleep wrapped in every scrap of fabric you own, your teeth chattering, your joints aching from the day's punishment. You'll dream of rivers and shade and bath of Uwe and wake up to sand in your mouth and a camel snoring next to your face. There's no relief, only mourning and more sand. You keep moving because you have no choice. The nearest water is days away. The last water tasted like copper and camel backwash. You've rationed your supplies to the point where even your raisins are starting to look like luxury. Every step feels heavier. Every breath grates against your throat. And the horizon never seems to get any closer. The desert stretches in every direction, featureless and uncaring. It doesn't hate you. That would require the capacity for emotion. The Taklamakan is simply indifferent, which is somehow worse. And then, just as your last nerve frays and your skin feels like it might peel off in strips, a green smear appears on the horizon. An oasis, or maybe another lie. But this one doesn't shimmer. It doesn't flicker. It holds. A patch of trees, a glint of water, the suggestion of life. You don't cheer. You don't even speak. You just adjust your pack, nudge your camel forward, and keep moving. Because even if you survive this crossing, you know there will be more deserts ahead, more trials, and more reminders that this road was never meant for people like you. It was meant for ghosts. You made it out of the desert, and for about 5 minutes, you thought that meant things would improve. You saw some trees, you tasted actual water that didn't double as an intestinal curse. Maybe you even found a blanket that didn't reek of camel. But now, your caravan turns toward the horizon, and all you see are mountains. Sharp, towering, cloud-piercing monstrosities, dusted in snow and indifference. Welcome to the Pamirs, known to some as the roof of the world, and to others as that place where breathing stops and regret begins. You're about to find out which nickname is more accurate. The Pamirs and their cousins, the Tien Shan, the Hindu Kush, and a few other named piles of vertical misery, are part of what made the Silk Road such a fun exercise in existential suffering. These mountains weren't merely obstacles, they were tests, climatic, physical, spiritual. You would think ancient trade routes might have found a way around them. They did not. They went through them. Narrow paths carved into sheer cliffs, switchbacks barely wide enough for a goat, let alone your lumbering, sarcastic camel. And the air, thinner than your chances of a smooth trip. Altitude sickness becomes your new companion. You start with a headache, easy to ignore. Then your stomach flips, your vision blurs. You try to take a deep breath and get about half of one. There's simply not enough oxygen up here for the human ego to function. Your muscles ache from doing even the simplest tasks, like walking 5 feet or lifting your water flask. You feel lightheaded, but not in the whimsical way, more in the "am I going to vomit into the ravine?" way. Your guide says you'll acclimate soon. He's lying, or he grew up in these mountains and no longer recognizes human suffering. The paths are treacherous, even without the altitude. They crumble underfoot, shift with the frost, and disappear entirely after rock slides. Sometimes your caravan stops to clear a blockage. Sometimes it just reroutes. Sometimes it stares at the mess, shrugs, and pushes forward anyway, assuming your goods are still worth more than your spine. You walk with your back pressed to the mountain wall, trying not to look down at the hundreds of feet between your toes and the sharp rocks below. You fail, and now you have vertigo. Congratulations! You've unlocked a new level of anxiety. Weather in the mountains is less of a forecast and more of a random punishment generator. It might be sunny at breakfast, hailing by lunch and snowing before sunset. Wind cuts through your clothing like you're not even wearing it. Your fingers lose sensation. Your nose turns red, then white, then numb. You start to fantasize about fire. Not sitting near it, becoming it. A warm, crackling blaze instead of this cold, miserable sack of skin shivering its way through the sky. You consider lighting your spare socks on fire just to feel something. At night, you find shelter where you can. Usually, that means curling up against a rock wall, shivering under 2 thin blankets, trying to ignore the rhythmic crunch of frost forming on your boots. There are no trees for fuel. Your meals are cold, hard, and mostly theoretical. You chew dried meat that could double as armour, and sip tea that tastes like boiled regret. Some nights, you huddle close with your fellow travellers, not out of camaraderie, but because hypothermia is a team sport now. Your breath fogs in front of your face, your thoughts move sluggishly. You begin to suspect your kidneys have stopped communicating with the rest of your organs. Even the animals struggle here. Your camels, surprisingly, manage better than you do, but they move slower, complain more, and have started looking at you with something dangerously close to judgment. If you brought pack goats or yaks for the narrower passes, they fare a little better, but they still occasionally slip, trip, or just sit down and refuse to go further. When that happens, you unload them by hand, on the edge of a cliff, in the snow, with your fingers barely functioning. You don't cry. There's no moisture left in your body to spare. Sometimes you pass other travellers, caravans moving in the opposite direction, their faces equally gaunt and hollow-eyed. You exchange a few words if you share a language, or just a nod if you don't. No one lingers. The mountains don't like delays. There are shrines here too, little stone stacks or weathered prayer flags tied to dead branches. Travellers leave offerings, coins, trinkets, pieces of cloth. Not out of religious obligation, but desperation. At this altitude, you'll beg any deity who'll listen, even the ones made up by someone 3 towns ago. You begin to lose track of time. Every pass looks like the last one. Every rock formation feels familiar. You wonder if you've gone in circles. You check your map, a wrinkled scroll that offers about as much guidance as a drunken rumour. You trust your guide, not because he inspires confidence, but because you no longer have the mental capacity to doubt him. You just keep moving, one foot in front of the other, until, finally, the path begins to slope downward. When you descend out of the mountains, it doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like being released from a chokehold. Your chest expands again. You breathe deeply, greedily. Air, actual air, fills your lungs. You taste it like it's food. Your body slowly begins to thaw. Your fingers twitch back to life. Your camel spits on your boot, just to remind you who's really in charge. But you've made it through. You're no stronger, just colder, skinnier, and a little more broken. And somewhere ahead, waiting for your bruised little caravan, is the next circle of Silk Road hell. You should probably enjoy this brief moment of oxygen. It won't last. If the terrain doesn't kill you, the people might. That's a core tenet of Silk Road survival. Never assume the danger is over, just because the landscape has stopped trying to eat you. Now that you've escaped the desert's dehydration and the mountain's slow suffocation, it's time for the next leg of your journey. The part where someone smiles at you, distracts you with pleasantries, and then relieves you of your possessions. Welcome to the thriving industry of banditry, bribery, and backstabbing. If the Silk Road had customer service, it would come with a dagger. Bandits are not the cartoon villains you might expect. They're not always dirty men in rags jumping out from behind rocks. Sometimes they're that group of friendly locals who rode alongside your caravan for a day, offered dried apricots, and then came back at night to steal your camels. Other times they're part of an unofficial toll booth, a polite word for a loosely organised gang that charges passage fees and punctuates denial with sharp objects. Some even wear uniforms. You'll be robbed by men claiming to be soldiers, officials, tax collectors, or religious enforcers. Some of them might even be telling the truth, which doesn't make it any better. You might think your caravan is prepared. You've got guards, right? At least 2 of them, probably 3 if the budget's stretched far enough. Unfortunately, guards are expensive, disloyal, and often recruited from the same towns as the people trying to rob you. It's not uncommon for a caravan to be attacked only for the guards to accidentally miss the warning signs, or worse, to join in. And if you manage to fight off a bandit crew once, don't celebrate too loudly. Word spreads. Now you're the caravan that's worth the effort. Next time, they'll bring friends. Even without outright attacks, corruption is a daily companion. Every checkpoint along the route, and there are many, presents a new opportunity to lose money, patience, or both. City guards will inspect your goods and find problems you didn't know existed. A missing trade permit, a forbidden spice, a religious text in the wrong language. These are usually solved by placing a few silver coins into the right palm. Too little, and they confiscate your best wares. Too much, and you're suddenly on every corrupt official's generous idiot list. It's a delicate art, one you'll never quite master. Then there's betrayal from within. Your caravan is not a family. It is a temporary alliance held together by profit and fear, and both of those can erode faster than your trust. You start to notice things going missing. A pouch of coins here, a bolt of silk there. Someone swears they saw a bandit sneak into camp, but you're starting to suspect it was the same guy who always volunteers to stand watch and then mysteriously falls asleep. Fights break out. Tensions rise. Suspicion festers. You start sleeping with one eye open and your hand on your money belt, which is now mostly filled with lint and disappointment. Paranoia becomes a survival tactic. You learn not to share too much about your route, your cargo, or your destination. Questions that once seemed friendly now feel loaded. A merchant asks what city you're heading toward. Are they making conversation, or are they planning to beat you there and undercut your prices? Your guide tells you there's a shortcut. Is that efficiency, or a plan to get you isolated in a nice ambush spot? You begin to look at everyone with narrowed eyes, including your own reflection. You also can't forget about politics. The Silk Road cuts through dozens of territories, each with its own laws, rulers, and grudges. Some of these places are at war, officially or unofficially, and travellers like you are considered fair game. Your caravan might fly a flag from one city, only to find out it's banned in the next. Or worse, it's the flag of a rival. Suddenly you're not just a merchant, you're a spy, or a smuggler, or an agent of moral decay, depending on which holy man is yelling the loudest. And if you think the guards at the gate are bad, wait until you meet the tax inspectors on the inside. All of this makes trust a luxury you can't afford. Every interaction is a gamble. Every relationship is a contract with invisible terms. You become fluent in polite vagueness, strategic silence, and smiling just long enough to pass through the next checkpoint. You learn to hide your valuables in multiple places, not that it'll help much when you're tied to a tree with no boots. You stop asking questions when someone in your caravan disappears overnight. You pretend not to notice when two traders quietly rearrange the packs on someone else's camel. And yet, somehow, the trade continues, because even with all the theft, bribery, and betrayal, there is still profit to be made if you survive, if you keep just enough of your goods and just enough of your sanity. The Silk Road isn't fair. It was never meant to be. It's a long, winding network of opportunity built atop the bones of the unlucky and the naive. And now you're part of it. Just another trader walking the line between commerce and chaos, hoping the next stranger you meet wants your spices, not your blood. After weeks of choking sand, crumbling mountain paths, suspicious stew, and the occasional attempted mugging, you finally arrive at a city, a real one, with walls, towers, and gates carved in at least 3 scripts you can't read, guarded by men in fur-trimmed lamella armour who absolutely do not want to let you in. But a few coins, a borrowed smile, and a list of half-truths about your cargo later, the gates creak open, and you're ushered into one of the Silk Road's glittering prize cities. Maybe Samarkand, maybe Bukhara, maybe Kashgar. Honestly, at this point, geography feels less important than the simple miracle of not sleeping beside a screaming camel for one night. At first glance, the city is a marvel. Minarets rise like stone lances into the sky. Domes glitter in the sun, tiled in turquoise and gold. The streets are a blur of colour and motion. You smell spices, smoke, dung, sweat, incense, more dung, and something faintly floral that may or may not be hallucinogenic. Every corner pulses with life. You're surrounded by voices, some singing, some arguing, some haggling, some issuing subtle threats in such melodic tones that you don't realise what's happening until someone gestures for your severed hand. This is the Bazaar, the heaving, contagious, multilingual bloodstream of the Silk Road. It's a market, a negotiation pit, a rumour mill, and a low-level fever dream. Traders from every corner of the Mongol Empire and beyond crowd into this chaotic mess. Chinese merchants with lacquered goods, Indian spice dealers, Arab glassmakers, Armenian silversmiths, Genoese middlemen, Persian rug sellers, and one man trying to convince you a painted lizard tail is actually a dragon's finger. He's almost convincing, almost. You don't shop here, you navigate. The paths between stalls are barely wide enough to exhale without brushing someone's sword hilt. Children dart underfoot, either playing or pickpocketing, it's hard to say. Merchants bark prices at you in Mongolian, Persian, Uyghur, Arabic, and a few creative hybrids. A monkey escapes, a sheep blocks your path, a pomegranate hits you in the ear. You reach for your coin pouch and discover your translator holding it up with a tired smirk. For now, doing business here is a kind of ritualized warfare. You sit down with a trader, a man who pretends not to notice you, pretends to cry, pretends to storm off, then returns an hour later demanding a discount and a bottle of wine. You trade your saffron for bolts of silk, which you suspect have been marked up to orbit. You smile. He smiles. You both know this is a con, but neither of you wants to lose face. Haggling is a performance. It's theatre with financial consequences. And you're not a great actor. The cultural soup here is dense enough to choke on. You see Mongol officials on horseback flashing paisa tablets, those little metal passports that let them demand food and shelter in the name of the Khan. You see Sogdian scribes with ink-stained fingers, Nestorian Christian priests in worn robes, and Buddhist monks swaying gently while burning something suspiciously resinous. You try to remember which greetings are respectful and which accidentally imply that someone's mother is a donkey. Your translator is sweating. You're pretty sure he just betrothed you to someone's niece. Ah, and the food. It smells like paradise dipped in garlic and set on fire. Grilled lamb, honey cakes, spiced stews, fried pastries, flatbread still steaming from the tandoor. You tell yourself, one bite won't hurt. One roasted apricot later, you're in a public latrine praying for death. Mongol cities have thriving food cultures and absolutely no understanding of germ theory. You drink hot tea obsessively, not for the taste, but because boiling water is your last defense against your own intestines. Lodging naturally is a nightmare. The city is packed. Traders snore like war drums. One man insists he fought a snow leopards in the Pamirs, naked. You find a spot in a shared room above a candle shop that smells like rancid tallow and regret. You sleep in your clothes. You tuck your money pouch under your shirt. You keep one hand on your knife and the other on your boots. Trust is for locals. And while you're juggling commerce, gastronomy, and gastrointestinal trauma, the local politics quietly sharpen their knives. Mongol governors like to appear friendly. They smile. They permit religious freedom. They let merchants travel relatively safely, but they also collect taxes like it's a competitive sport, employ informants in every tea house, and occasionally execute guests just to remind the rest of the room who's in charge. Trade is good, but your presence, tolerated for now. You leave the bazaar not triumphant but upright. You made some trades. You avoided being robbed, arrested, poisoned, or married. You only got moderately ill. You're a little richer, a little wiser, and significantly more constipated. The city gave you stories, merchandise, and possibly a new parasite. And now, the road is calling again. That long, dry, cursed corridor, stretching out toward yet another disaster. You adjust your pack, you wince at your camel, and you keep walking. Because that's what traders do. Until they don't. After a long day of sweating through your last clean tunic and avoiding pickpockets with religious enthusiasm, there's nothing quite like sitting down to a hot meal and wondering if it's going to kill you. Along the Silk Road, food is essential, unpredictable, and frequently a biological weapon in disguise. It reflects the local geography, available livestock, trade connections, and, most importantly, how far down the culinary ladder desperation has taken you. You'll eat whatever's put in front of you. The real question is whether you'll regret it during dinner or several hours later while whispering apologies to a bush. Your culinary journey begins with meat. Mutton usually, not the tender, roasted leg of lamb fantasy kind. No, this is more often chunks of gristly sheep boiled beyond recognition and generously coated in its own grease. If you're lucky, it's served with salt. If you're very lucky, it's dead. Central Asian nomads love their livestock, but they also love eating every possible part of it. You'll be offered intestines, liver, lungs, maybe even the boiled head, eyes intact. Refusing is considered rude. Accepting is considered brave. Chewing is considered optimistic. If you're travelling through Turkic or Mongol regions, congratulations, you've unlocked the dairy portion of the menu. Unfortunately, dairy doesn't always mean milk in the creamy, fresh sense. It usually means fermented. Yogurt's so sour it burns your sinuses. Milk that's been curdled, dried, ground into a powder, reconstituted with warm water, and then handed to you with pride. The crown jewel is kumis, fermented mare's milk. It's slightly alcoholic, intensely tangy, and smells like what happens when a stable loses a bet. Locals swear by its health benefits. You will swear too, but not in gratitude. Grains make an appearance when geography allows. In the cities, you'll find wheat-based flatbreads, cooked in tandoor-style ovens, occasionally sprinkled with sesame or poppy seeds. They're chewy, sturdy, and only mildly dusty if you drop them while fleeing an argument. Rice might grace your bowl further east, often boiled into a kind of porridge and mixed with dried fruits, nuts, or chunks of very unidentifiable protein. In leaner regions, you're looking at barley, millet, or whatever grain hasn't been devoured by rats, locusts, or your fellow travellers during a particularly tense night. Fruits and vegetables are seasonal and inconsistent. Apricots, grapes, melons, and dates appear in the more fertile areas, usually dried for travel or mashed into syrups. You'll spot onions, garlic, carrots, and maybe some herbs at roadside stalls or city markets. But don't get too excited. Anything fresh is a gamble. Did the water used to wash that fruit come from a clean well, or the same stream where a man was washing his infected foot? Is that lovely green herb a garnish or a hallucinogenic mistake? Culinary roulette is part of the fun. Spices are both blessing and curse. They're everywhere along the Silk Road. Cinnamon, cloves, saffron, turmeric, pepper, traded in tiny quantities, worth their weight in gold. They can disguise rancid meat, flavour bland porridge, and make a stew feel like an exotic experience. But they can also hide the taste of spoilage, making it harder to know whether your stomachache is cultural adjustment or parasitic invasion. And once you get used to a certain spice blend, the next town will cook with something entirely different, usually stronger, occasionally toxic. Surprise, water is the real challenge. You can't trust it. Not from streams, not from wells, not even from city fountains where birds bathe, children splash, and questionable traders wash questionable things. Boiled tea becomes your lifeline. It might taste like bitter grass or burned wood, but it's safer than the alternative. You learn to sip slowly, hold it in your mouth like a relic, and pray to whatever deity you favour that the cup was actually clean. When the tea runs out, you drink sparingly and filter through cloth, or just close your eyes and hope. And yet, you eat, because hunger overrides dignity. You crouch around a smoky fire, sharing a cracked bowl with a man who hasn't washed his hands since the last empire collapsed. You gnaw on hardened bread that could double as a weapon. You try not to think about the texture of the thing you just swallowed. Sometimes it crunches, sometimes it wiggles. You consider asking questions, Then decide you don't want the answers. Your stomach growls again. Fine, one more bite. Just chew quickly and don't make eye contact with the chef. Illness follows. Always. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually your digestive system will file a formal complaint. Diarrhea is the most frequent visitor, often arriving without knocking. Then come the fevers, the cramps, the mysterious rashes. Someone in your caravan is always recovering from something. Someone else is always entering a new gastrointestinal war. You stop asking for diagnosis and start assigning names to your symptoms. You call this one the apricot incident. You name that one goat regret. Still, food is a strange comfort. Meals are moments of stability, however questionable the contents. Around a shared pot, travellers talk. Deals are made, news is traded, jokes are told, laughter happens, even if it ends in a coughing fit. The food may be terrible, but the act of eating is human. And after a day spent dodging bandits, bribing guards, and losing track of your camel again, a hot bowl of mystery stew might be the closest thing you have to a reward. You finish your meal, wipe your hands on your robe, and sit back with the uneasy peace of someone who knows full well they've ingested something their body will soon reject. That's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, your belly is full. Sort of. And in this moment, surrounded by flickering firelight, chewing noises, and someone loudly belching praise to the cook, you almost feel content. Almost. Religion on the Silk Road isn't just background noise. It's the weather, the rule book, and the booby trap, all rolled into one. You don't get the luxury of ignoring it. You pass through one town where bowing is reverence, then immediately enter another where bowing is submission and therefore offensive. You greet a monk with a palm to your heart, and he flinches like you cursed his grandmother. You fail to greet a shaman at all, and suddenly the caravan master is staring at you like you just insulted the wind itself, which, knowing your luck, you probably did. By 1260 CE, the Silk Road is a spiritual kaleidoscope spinning at dizzying speed. Islam, Buddhism, Eastern Orthodox and Nestorian Christianity, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, Zoroastrianism, and various strains of Tengri shamanism all coexist along its roads. Thanks to the Mongols, there's a general policy of tolerance, one of the few perks of being ruled by horse lords, with a terrifying fondness for pluralism. But don't mistake tolerance for simplicity. Each religion still has its lines, its sacred spaces, its taboos, and the moment you cross one, knowingly or not, your trading privileges might come with a side of exile, or worse. You begin your journey in a Muslim-majority city under a Mongol governor who seems content to let the muezzin call to prayer without interference, provided taxes are paid on time. Here, you're expected to wash before entering mosques, remove your shoes, avoid stepping on prayer mats, and refrain from shouting about your fermented mare's milk hobby. Don't touch the imam. Don't stare at unveiled women like a confused sheep. And for the love of all that is holy, do not bring pork to the market. These infractions might earn you a polite warning, or a fine, or a sudden increase in processing fees at the next city gate. Further east, you might enter Buddhist territory. Temples are quiet, incense heavy, and crawling with serene monks who will absolutely offer you tea while silently judging your posture. You're welcomed, as long as you don't step over a prayer mat, touch a statue, or interrupt a chant to ask for directions to the latrine. You might sit down to a meatless meal and complain loudly that it could use more lamb fat. The monk serving you says nothing, but his smile shifts from inner peace to enlightened murder. You try to apologise, but karma is already loading its crossbow. Then there's Tengriism, the sky-worshipping animist faith of many Mongols. It doesn't rely on temples, it relies on not offending the spirits. Don't point at the sky with your knife. Don't step over sacred fires. Don't ask too many questions about the oddly quiet man with the drum. the local shaman isn't just a healer. He's a medium, a weather forecaster, and sometimes the legal system. If he declares you're carrying bad air, your fellow travellers may casually vote to leave you behind for the greater cosmic good. With your boots. And Christianity? Oh, that's here too, but probably not in the flavour you expect. The Nestorian Christians scattered across Central Asia have enough theological twists to give your priest back home an aneurysm. They build simple churches, carry crosses carved into wood or ivory, and recite prayers in Aramaic, Persian, or whatever the local dialect demands. They're tolerated by the Mongols, even respected in some cities, but flash the wrong symbol in front of the wrong cleric, and suddenly your necklace is heresy, and your foreign accent sounds suspiciously crusader-ish. Maybe you thought bringing your own token of faith, a prayer scroll, a protective charm, would be helpful. Sometimes it is. Other times, it's a one-way ticket to suspicion. One man's blessing is another's blasphemy. You wear an amulet shaped like a crescent moon, meant to ward off scorpions, and someone accuses you of summoning jinn. Ironically, you'd take a jinn over this particular inquisition. At least they come with 3 wishes. Even among your caravan, faith adds friction to every dusty mile. A Buddhist refuses to kill insects crawling over your rations. A Muslim insists on prayer breaks at exact intervals. A Christian interpreter mutters scripture every time someone sneezes. You try to stay neutral. You believe in trade, maybe luck, and definitely not being set on fire. But someone always asks what you believe. You say, "I believe in not dying." No one laughs. Sometimes you stumble into shared shrines, little syncretic spaces where religions overlap without quite touching. A Zoroastrian fire temple that also accepts Buddhist offerings. A stupa where Muslim travellers light lamps and whisper quiet prayers. For a moment, you feel like the world is holding itself together out of sheer exhaustion. Then someone knocks over an incense bowl, mutters the wrong chant, and the awkward tension returns like fleas to a saddle. And when you inevitably mess up, because you will, the punishment may be subtle or theatrical. You might be quietly barred from the next city. You might be fined in a language you don't speak. Or you might find yourself paraded through the bazaar, your hair shaved, your sandals stolen, and your name rewritten on a blacklist that stretches from Baghdad to Beijing. It's hard to haggle when everyone thinks you cursed a well. Religion on the Silk Road is like everything else here, complex, essential, and merciless to fools. You'll never learn every custom, but you can learn to shut up, copy what other people do, and bow twice just in case. Don't convert, don't argue, don't joke. Just nod, light the candle, eat the bland food, whisper your prayers to whatever god is least likely to get offended. And if the shaman says your aura's leaking again, maybe don't ask questions, just offer tea. You haven't been clean in weeks, maybe months. Honestly, you've stopped counting. At this point, your body feels less like a cohesive human form and more like a collection of competing biological crises taped together with dried sweat and matted hair. Your skin itches in places you can't discreetly scratch in public. Your clothes smell like spoiled vinegar and wet animal, and your fingernails have become archaeological records of everywhere you've eaten, fallen, or bled. This is what hygiene looks like on the Silk Road: theoretical, optional, and wildly ineffective. You were optimistic once. Back in the beginning, you carried soap. Maybe a brush you thought you'd wash when you reached a stream. That stream turned out to be a muddy trench used by livestock, laundry, and a man enthusiastically vomiting after eating some questionable melon. Since then, you've bathed by splashing water on your face while pretending not to notice the things floating in it. You wipe yourself down with rags that stopped being clean about 10 towns ago. Your socks could now stand upright on their own. Your travelling companions have started giving you more personal space, not out of politeness, but out of survival instinct. Your skin has taken on a texture somewhere between parchment and old leather. Every scrape becomes an infection. Every insect bite turns into a mystery swelling. You develop rashes with interesting shapes. Someone suggests they look like a map. You joke that maybe you can use them for navigation. No one laughs. You scratch too hard and start bleeding. You stop scratching. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. You suspect your body is staging a quiet rebellion and will soon file for independence. And the bugs. Oh, the bugs. You have lice now. Multiple kinds. Some live in your hair. Others have colonized your underclothes. They bite. They lay eggs. They host community events. You try everything. Ash, vinegar, prayer, and still they thrive. One morning, you find a flea in your breakfast. You eat around it. You're too tired to care. Bed bugs join in next, hiding in the straw mats you sleep on, at inns and caravanserais. They emerge at night, take what they need, and vanish before dawn, like little criminal syndicates. You've started naming the more persistent ones. Carl is particularly aggressive. You hate Carl. Disease, of course, is not content to stop at minor infestations. It comes for your gut, your lungs, your skin, and occasionally your sanity. Dysentery is the most common companion, a punishing, humiliating ordeal that turns your digestive system into a leaky faucet. You eat something vaguely goat-shaped, and 12 hours later, you're reduced to whimpering behind a bush, holding onto your water flask and your pride by equally thin threads. Cholera makes an appearance too, if you're unlucky, and you probably are. There's no shortage of people coughing blood in public spaces and then insisting they're fine. Public baths offer a sliver of hope, structured, social, and vaguely promising. In cities like Bukhara or Baghdad, you might find a hammam or a communal bathhouse. You strip down, soak in hot water, scrub off weeks of crusted regret, and emerge feeling something close to human. Until, of course, you realise the water is recycled and someone upstream used it to wash a goat, a corpse, or their latest pustule. The steam opens your pores, the germs waltz in. You leave cleaner, but more infected. Congratulations. Skin diseases abound. Boils, sores, weird blotches that shimmer slightly in the right light. Someone in your caravan develops what looks like leprosy, and suddenly no one wants to share food with him. There's whispering, then avoidance, then banishment to the back of the line. You don't know if it's leprosy or just another mysterious rash, but you do know that social distancing has existed for longer than you thought. You start sleeping with your arms wrapped around your belongings, not to guard them from thieves, but to avoid skin-to-skin contact with the man beside you who is now visibly flaking. Your teeth are no better. The combination of stress, poor diet, and a distinct lack of dentistry means you're starting to feel your molars wiggle. Your gums bleed when you chew anything tougher than bread. You try to smile less. It hurts anyway. Your breath could be weaponized. You'd brush if you had bristles. You try using a twig once. It snaps. You give up. You pretend it's cultural. Infections spread quickly. One cook cuts his hand while butchering a lamb. 2 days later, his whole arm is swollen and purple. Someone suggests a poultice. Someone else suggests amputation. They compromise by doing neither and watching. The cook stops cooking. The food gets worse. You try not to think about how often your own hands are nicked, blistered, or just weirdly damp. You wonder how many diseases are incubating quietly under your fingernails. Medicine exists, in theory. Your caravan carries a pouch of dried herbs, a pot of mystery ointment, and a man who once shadowed a healer for 3 weeks, and now calls himself a physician. He applies foul-smelling paste to your rashes and tells you to avoid stress. You laugh until you pull a muscle. He offers a tea that smells like burned grass and sadness. You drink it. You feel the same, but now your tongue is green. You are falling apart, slowly, steadily, inevitably. But you're not alone. Everyone on the Silk Road is decomposing in sync. You begin to recognize the smell of a fellow traveler, not as offensive, but familiar. comforting even. Misery has a scent and it's probably coming from your boots. You carry on, one foot in front of the other. Because if disease doesn't stop you, the next part of the road certainly will. Just when you've adjusted to being filthy, lice-ridden, sunburned, and periodically robbed, the Silk Road decides to play another round of its favourite game. Surprise! You're in a different country now. Not because you crossed a mountain or a river, but because someone new has decided they rule this patch of sand. Yesterday, it was the governor of some crumbling Persian outpost. Today, it's the nephew of a Mongol warlord. Tomorrow? Could be a caravan leader with ambition, a monk with a militia, or a particularly assertive goat. One thing is certain, your permits are invalid again, and you're about to lose money to someone wearing a hat that proves he's in charge. The year is 1260 CE, and the Mongol Empire is in full swing, or more accurately, in the middle of fracturing while pretending everything's fine. Technically, you're under the rule of the Great Khan in distant Karakoram, but in practice, you're weaving through the patchwork of successor states, military governors, and semi-autonomous city-states that make up the day-to-day chaos of Silk Road politics. The Pax Mongolica, the so-called Mongol peace, has reduced the number of random massacres, but it hasn't stopped the paperwork, the bribes, or the guards with itchy swords and flexible loyalties. You approach a checkpoint manned by soldiers wearing fur-trimmed armour and expressions that suggest they haven't laughed since their last public execution. They ask your name, your business, your cargo, and your favourite type of dried fruit, because small talk is apparently part of the intimidation ritual. You hand over your paisa, a stamped metal tablet bearing imperial approval, and hope they recognise it. One squints, one snorts, one immediately asks for a toll. You hand over a pouch of coins. It's not enough. You hand over another. Still not enough? Finally, your translator hands over his boots, and mysteriously, you're waved through. No one discusses the boots again. Every stretch of the Silk Road belongs to someone, and that someone always thinks you're underpaying. Taxation is both a science and an art form here. You pay a fee for entering a region, another for using the road, another for the weight of your cargo, another for the number of camels, with a discount if one of them is visibly dying. Then there's the cultural preservation tax, which no one explains but everyone enforces. And if your goods are unusual, say Persian glassware, or a suspiciously large crate labelled buttons, the guards may decide you're a smuggler, just to see what you'll offer to prove you're not. Sometimes, the people at the checkpoint aren't even soldiers. They're just men with sharp weapons and convincing flags who've decided that, for today, they're an independent Khanate. You argue, they laugh, you hand over a bribe. They hand you a document with a red stamp that looks suspiciously like a wine stain. Your translator says it means safe passage. You remain unconvinced but move on anyway, because there's no refund policy for extortion. In rare moments, you hit the jackpot, a stretch of land still firmly under Mongol control, with actual administration and functioning courier stations. You flash your paita and get fresh horses, a hot meal, and a bed with only minor insect activity. For one brief glorious day, you feel like a respected merchant instead of a walking wallet. But by sunrise, you're back in disputed territory, where 5 rival factions claim the same road, and none of them take visa. Diplomacy becomes part of your daily routine. You memorize titles, practice bows of varying depths, and hire guides who swear they know which badge gets you through which gate. You don't trust them, but you trust your own instincts even less. You try to flatter a governor's son by praising his hawk. Turns out it's his wife's bird. You try to gift some saffron to a customs officer. Turns out his cousin died from bad saffron. You try to stay quiet. That's worse. Now you look suspicious. By the end of the day, you're eating cold lentils behind a stable while your caravan is searched for contraband that doesn't exist. And just when you think you've figured out the system, what to say, who to pay, Which coin to bite and which to hide, something changes. A regional war breaks out. A merchant guild collapses. A prophet declares your cargo cursed. You're rerouted 300 miles around a dispute you don't understand, through territory controlled by a minor prince with major insecurity. He taxes your camels, your blankets, and your sighs. You consider screaming, but the last man who raised his voice is now working as a decorative skull near the city gate. So you adapt. You sew coins into your waistband. You learn which dialect to greet the guards in, which to avoid, and which to pretend you forgot. You travel with 3 sets of papers, each official, each signed by someone who no longer holds office. You keep your tone humble, your smile wide, and your eyes on the man with the biggest hat, because that's probably the one who can ruin your week with a flick of his hand. Eventually, you pass the checkpoint. Again, you're a few coins poorer, a few insults richer, and the proud owner of a brand new travel restriction stamped in a language no one in your group can read. It might say merchant, it might say suspicious, it might say don't let this idiot back in. You shrug, tuck it into your bag, and keep walking. Because tomorrow you'll be in someone else's empire, and the roulette wheel spins on. You thought you were making progress. The weather was hot, dusty, and unpleasant, but it was consistent. You were sweating through your clothes by noon and freezing by midnight. But at least the ground was visible. You had sun, you had stars, you had something resembling direction. And then the wind shifted. The temperature dropped. The sky turned the colour of regret. And now, everything is white. The road has vanished under a silent, smothering blanket of snow. And you realise, with the quiet panic of someone far from help, that you've officially lost the trail. Winter on the Silk Road doesn't arrive gently. There's no polite warning, no graceful descent of snowflakes. It hits like a betrayal, sudden, blunt, and cold enough to shatter your teeth. The dirt tracks you once followed are now hidden beneath ice and powder. Landmarks become unrecognisable, transformed into vague, snow-draped mounds. Your guide squints at the horizon and mutters that he's pretty sure you're still heading the right direction. You're not. You're very much not. Snow slows everything. Your caravan creaks forward like a wounded animal. Wheels sink, legs slip, animals balk. The camels, usually indifferent to your suffering, now refuse to move, unless bribed with warm mash or pure rage. Their humps are dusted in frost. Their breath comes in thick plumes, like miniature steam engines powered by contempt. Your boots soak through within an hour, and the wet settles into your bones. You try to wiggle your toes occasionally, mostly to confirm they're still attached. The cold is no longer a discomfort, it's an opponent. It numbs your hands until you can't grip your reins. It hardens your cloak until it cracks when folded. You lose feeling in your nose, your ears, your sense of hope. Sleep becomes dangerous. You lie too still for too long, and you don't wake up. One of your fellow travellers doesn't answer when called. His blanket is stiff with frost. No one speaks. You bury him in the snow with your hands because the ground is too frozen to dig. Then come the wolves. You hear them first. Distant howls echoing off the frozen hills. At night, they draw closer. You glimpse glowing eyes at the edge of camp. Flickers of movement between trees that weren't there during daylight. They're not always hungry. But when they are, they test your perimeter. They target the sick, the young, the distracted. A donkey disappears. Then a goat. Then a man, gone between one watch shift and the next, leaving behind only drag marks and a few scattered possessions. You light fires at night, not for warmth, but as a warning. You keep weapons close, though you're not sure how much a rusty dagger will do against a coordinated pack. Getting lost isn't a sudden event, it's gradual, like slipping into a fog you thought you could walk through. One missed turn, one river crossed a little too early, one landmark buried under snow. The caravan hesitates, doubles back, argues, splits, Some insist they know the way, others demand to wait it out. You try to keep moving, because stillness is death, but every mile feels like gambling. You no longer trust your map. You no longer trust your guide. You barely trust your own memory. That rocky ridge, wasn't it supposed to be on the left yesterday? Panic creeps in. Not loudly, it seeps through the cracks in your confidence. You start second-guessing everything. Your supplies are low. Your animals are faltering. Your fellow travelers are exhausted, half frozen, and visibly beginning to lose their grip. Someone starts talking to the fire like it's answering back. Someone else spends an hour staring at the snow, whispering that the road is beneath it, as if the right prayer might part the drifts. You begin to understand why people go mad in the cold. It's not the silence that breaks you. It's the possibility that you're walking in circles, that the next ridge is the same one from 4 days ago. Food becomes rationed, then halved, then guessed at. You chew dried meat that tastes like rope. You boil snow to drink, which is technically water but somehow manages to make you thirstier. Hunger turns you mean, tense, distrustful. You eye your fellow travellers not with suspicion, but with calculation. Who's slowing you down? Who still has food hidden in their packs? Who looks like they're considering eating the pack animals? Or you? Eventually, the snow thins. The wind dies down. You descend into a lower pass and suddenly the road reappears like a miracle. A muddy strip winding through half-dead trees and frozen mud. You stumble forward, too tired to cheer, too sore to care. You've made it through the blizzard. Sort of. You're thinner, colder, and more paranoid than before. But alive, technically. The truth is, the Silk Road doesn't just test your endurance, it erodes your sense of direction, geographic and mental. It leaves you wandering, literally and figuratively, through landscapes designed to break your body and scramble your compass. And when the snow finally melts and the path becomes clear again, you don't feel triumphant. You feel lucky, and you don't trust luck. Not out here. You came here to trade. At least, that's the story you keep repeating. To yourself, to border officials, and to the slightly suspicious monk who's been eyeing your cargo for the past 3 days. You're a merchant, a humble, hard-working, honest merchant. And yet, somehow, your bags seem to be carrying more secrets than saffron. Because here on the Silk Road, especially in the Mongol-controlled year of 1260, no one is just a merchant. Not really. By now you've figured out that the line between legitimate trader and criminal courier is almost comically thin. Maybe you're transporting bolts of Chinese silk, dried fruit from Bukhara, or lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. All perfectly legal. Officially. Unofficially, there's that pouch sewn into your saddlebag. The one you definitely don't open in public. It might contain banned manuscripts from Persia. It might contain imperial Chinese court gossip scrawled in code. It might, and this is the dangerous one, contain silkworm eggs. Because while silk is valuable, the means of making it is worth empires. And carrying silkworms out of China? That's not commerce. That's espionage punishable by death, ideally public and prolonged. The Mongols, for all their love of trade, still respect China's strict sericulture laws. The Yuan court doesn't want other powers breeding their own silk, but plenty of people do. And so, the worms move, in hollow walking sticks, behind false walls in crates, stitched into the hems of diplomatic robes. If you're lucky, they don't hatch early. If you're unlucky, they do. And you're left explaining why your luggage is full of hungry larvae and damp mulberry leaves. That is, if anyone gives you the chance to explain before you're dragged off for questioning. But not everything smuggled on the Silk Road is as exotic as eggs. Sometimes it's paper, maps, religious tracts, subversive poetry. Sometimes it's people, scholars fleeing persecution, couriers posing as monks, or someone's mistress in a packing crate with a week's supply of flatbread. And sometimes it's just information. Because out here, knowledge is currency, and you're increasingly aware that someone is using you to move it. It starts small. One of your fellow travellers asks you to carry a sealed letter to a merchant contact in Merv. No big deal. But then someone else asks you to deliver a gift to a cousin in Kashgar, a gift that's oddly heavy and comes with very specific instructions not to open it, not to shake it, and not to mention it to anyone who seems too official. By the time a minor bureaucrat in Balkh starts asking how many guards Samarkand has on its eastern gate, you realise you're not just ferrying spices anymore. You're part of something. You just don't know what. The Mongol administration, despite its brutality, is obsessed with communication. Relay stations dot the empire. Couriers ride with stamped tokens of authority. Intelligence moves faster than caravans. And yet there's always a hunger for more. More maps, more troop movements, more rumours of rebellion. You suspect someone in your caravan is a spy. Probably more than one. They ask too many questions. They pay too much attention. They don't haggle. Only two kinds of people don't haggle on the Silk Road: royalty and informants. You assume it's the latter. You try to stay neutral. You try to focus on trade. But neutrality is dangerous. Everyone wants loyalty. A Mongol official might request that you deliver a diplomatic scroll. A Sufi mystic might hand you a relic wrapped in cloth and ask you to carry it somewhere holy. Refusing these errands is suspicious. Accepting them is worse. You're caught between factions, between empires, between truths you don't understand, and lies you're too afraid to question. Religion adds its own layer of risk. Buddhist monks pass around texts banned in China. Muslim scholars quietly circulate commentaries that contradict official doctrine. Nestorian Christians whisper of relics moved under cover of night. You've shared meals with all of them. You've said prayers in languages you don't speak. You've transported packages whose contents you'll never ask about again. Not because you're obedient, because you're tired of danger wrapped in silk and smiles. Even your caravan isn't innocent. One of your guards once stabbed a tax collector who asked too many questions. Your translator seems to know far too much about coin weights and imperial ciphers. Your cook, a harmless-looking man who makes an excellent lentil stew, owns a knife that has never, in your memory, been used on food. You don't ask questions. You sleep with your documents under your shirt, and your doubts shoved deep under your bedroll. Because in 1260, under Mongol rule, the Silk Road is a strange paradox, safer than it's ever been, and somehow still one mistake away from becoming your grave. You carry goods, yes, but you also carry secrets, some yours, most not. And when, not if, something goes wrong, your best hope is ignorance. I didn't know might not save your life, but it's still a better defense than honesty. You keep your head down. You smile at border guards. You nod politely when asked vague questions with specific implications. You trade. You move on. You try not to think about the favour you promised a Persian courtier back in Herat, or the odd bundle you agreed to deliver to a caravanserai in Tabriz, or the map someone slipped into your pack without asking. You're just a merchant. That's your story. Stick to it. After months of blistered feet, half-frozen fingers, camel flatulence, and the creeping certainty that your bones have begun to fuse from malnutrition, you see it. A city. A real one. Not a windswept outpost or a caravanserai with 2 cracked wells and a goat that bites. A proper city. With towers, gates, roofs, a skyline that doesn't make you feel like you're hallucinating. Maybe it's Constantinople, or Baghdad, or Chang'an. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you've survived long enough to smell humanity again. Unfortunately, humanity smells like sewage, spice and disappointment. You roll toward the gates on wobbling wheels, breath caught between hope and a mild case of bronchitis. You were expecting a hero's welcome. You get bureaucracy. The line to enter stretches so long, you suspect some of these travellers have grown old and died in place. The guards were resplendent in armour that's seen more parades than battle, inspect every cart like it might contain treason, wrapped in turmeric. They check your documents, they check your camels, they ask if you're carrying weapons, forbidden texts, or bad intentions. You try to smile, but your lips are so cracked it feels like you're tearing paper. Eventually, they wave you in. Not because they trust you, no one does, but because the shift is nearly over and the guards have somewhere better to be. You shuffle through the gates, your caravan coughing and groaning like a half-dead beast, and enter the city proper. And that's when you realise civilization isn't a blessing. It's an avalanche of noise, filth, and desperate commerce. You dreamed of arrival, of stepping into a gleaming world where gold dust floats in the air and bathhouses welcome the weary. Instead, you're hit with the scent of unwashed bodies, open drains, frying meat, and something that may once have been fish. The streets are chaos. Merchants shout. Children run underfoot. A man in a tunic smeared with something red hurls a basket of eels into your path. Someone accuses your camel of blasphemy. You haven't even found lodging yet, and already you've been jostled, overcharged, and sneezed on by a monk. You stagger to the market quarter, or more accurately, you're shoved toward it by the tide of traffic. Your arrival here, you thought, would mean profit, respect, validation. Instead, you find saturation. Dozens of caravans beat you here, bringing silk so fine they shimmer like oil, and spices so fragrant they make your pepper smell like mildew. You spread your wares, bolts of fabric, a few carefully preserved bundles of cloves, maybe a decorative trinket you were assured was very desirable. A buyer glances, then moves on. Apparently, yours is the kind of merchandise that looks better under dust and optimism. The haggling begins, or tries to. You name a price that once made sense. They laugh. You name a lower price. They yawn. Eventually, you're offering silk for less than the cost of your own undergarments, and being told it's still overpriced. You sell a pouch of cinnamon for 2 copper coins, and an apology. You trade a bronze clasp for half a loaf of bread and a shrug. One man offers you a single boiled onion in exchange for your entire stock of thread. You nearly take it, not because it's a good deal, but because it's the first hot thing you've seen in 3 weeks. You console yourself with the idea of resting, maybe a warm room, a real bed, the miracle of a bath. Then you meet the city's rental market. Inns are crowded, private rooms are mythical. The cheapest bunk costs more than your camel is worth, and comes with 6 roommates, 2 rats, and 1 philosophical debate about whether lice count as divine punishment. You end up in a narrow loft above a money changer's shop. The ceiling leaks, the mattress has fleas. The walls are paper thin, which is how you learn far too much about your neighbour's digestive habits. To legally sell here, you need papers, licenses, stamps, endorsements, possibly a minor miracle. The city's scribes are either missing, asleep, or hiding behind layers of bureaucracy so dense they require translation. Each document costs money. Each office charges a fee. Each fee requires another signature, which means another line. You begin to miss the simplicity of bribes. At least, bandits had the courtesy to rob you quickly. By the time your permits are approved, the market has shifted again. Prices have dropped. Demand has dried up. You're told the fashion this week is indigo, and your goods are the wrong shade. You consider shouting. Instead, you sit quietly on a mat that smells like garlic and defeat, trying to look respectable as you sell the last of your clothes to a man who openly tells you he plans to resell them at double the price. And then, the worst realization, you have to decide what's next. Do you stay in this city, scraping out a life among strangers who speak 6 dialects and trust none of them? Or do you turn around and walk the whole cursed road in reverse, older, thinner, half-broken, and no more welcome than when you arrived? You wanted glory, you got grit, you wanted wealth, you got onions. The city is here, civilization in all its loud, steaming, overcrowded majesty. and it smells unmistakably like disappointment. Welcome home. You made it, somehow. Against nature, odds, and your own bodily failings, you clawed your way across the Silk Road and lived to tell the tale. You arrived in the city, bruised, half-starved, lice-ridden, and you even managed to sell a few things before the market spat you back out. You tasted civilization. You smelled its drains. You stood in a public square and contemplated collapsing. And now, just when your legs have stopped shaking and your bowels have stopped rebelling, someone asks, "So, when are you heading back?" You laugh. Then you realise they're serious. Because of course this wasn't a one-way pilgrimage. This was a round trip. You're not a hero returning from a quest, you're a merchant. You came to buy and sell, not to settle down and become a local oddity. The city isn't yours. The language is wrong. The laws are incomprehensible. The plumbing is theoretical. And your bed, if you can even call it that, is infested with something that probably has an oral history. If you want to go home, if you want to see your family again, or just die in a place where someone might recognise your name, you have to do the unthinkable. You have to walk back. Not metaphorically, literally, walk, ride, crawl, limpio, whatever gets you over those mountains and through those deserts again. Only this time, you're starting in worse shape. Your clothes are torn. Your camel hates you. Your knees sound like musical instruments when you crouch. You smell like a fermented nightmare, and the rash that once itched is now oozing in complex rhythms. You've lost weight, teeth, and faith, but not your obligations. So you load up your pack with new goods, fewer coins, and a deep, silent scream, and step back onto the road. You tell yourself the way back will be easier. You know the route now. You know which rivers flood, which tolls are negotiable, and which safe towns are actually full of thieves in vests. But familiarity doesn't mean comfort. It just means you know what to dread. You recognise the bend where your caravan was ambushed. You remember the gorge where you lost that wheel, the saddle sore that became infected, the innkeeper who definitely stole your blanket. These places are no longer exotic. They're old wounds with mile markers. Your company has changed. Half the traders you came with are gone. Some by choice, some by fate. Some simply vanished in the night with their camels and your patience. You join up with a fresh-faced group, heading the same way. They're optimistic. Their robes are clean. They talk about opportunities and profit margins. You say nothing. You eat your hard bread in silence and listen to them plan, as if planning matters. You don't want to ruin their spirit. Not because you're kind, but because it would take too much energy. Food is a grim joke now. The rations you once found barely tolerable now trigger involuntary shudders. The dried meat tastes like sandal. The cheese sweats in your bag. You chew, you swallow, you survive. Once you find something resembling an apricot. You bite into it and discover a thriving community of worms. You finish eating it anyway. You tell yourself it's extra protein, but really, it's just despair management. And then there's your health, or what's left of it. You creak when you move. Your feet are blistered in new and exciting configurations. You cough like a minor character in a plague play. You develop a limp, and then develop a second limp to balance out the first. You have a scar you don't remember earning. Your camel farts more than it walks. You start talking to it like it's your spouse. It doesn't answer. You worry that if it ever does, you'll respond. Your sense of time breaks down. Days blur. Nights are indistinguishable, except by temperature and volume of insect life. You mark progress by injuries. The cracked rib in the mountains, the fever near the salt flats, the bruised ego after getting out-haggled by a child. You count the days not in numbers, but in milestones of humiliation. That was 3 days after the rotten fig. That was the week of the infected tooth. That was right before you considered selling your boots and walking barefoot just to spite your own feet. Eventually, you reach home. It doesn't feel like home. The streets are quieter than you remember. The buildings look smaller. The people speak your language. but the words sound different. You return to your house, if it's still there, and sit in the corner like a ghost. Friends ask about your journey. You nod vaguely. They laugh, expecting stories. You tell them it was long. That's all. Anything more would sound like madness. You count your coins. You compare them to what you left with. You discover that once you factor in bribes, repairs, fees, and the cost of your own dignity, you've made enough profit to buy a goat. A small, suspicious goat. You name it after one of your dead travel companions and try not to think about the road anymore. But you do, because that's the trap. The Silk Road doesn't let you go. You start to remember the moments, in between the horror, the stars over the Gobi, the quiet kindness of a stranger in Kashgar, the rush of selling at just the right moment. You think maybe, just maybe, you've learned enough now. That it might be different next time. Better, smarter, faster. And so, you find yourself staring at your old map. You clean your gear, you re-oil your boots, you start asking questions about salt prices, and you realise the road has won. Again. And that's the end of tonight's slow, dusty collapse through the twisted, lung-crushing gauntlet that was the Silk Road. A trade route that promised fortune, but mostly delivered frostbite, parasites, and diplomatic disasters in 3 languages. From spoiled yogurt and screaming camels, to sand-choked lungs, and cities that robbed you legally. Your legacy wasn't glory. It was survival. Barely. Thanks for staggering through this long, uncomfortable journey with me. If you're still awake, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where along the route you would have given up. The desert, the mountains, or the part with the lice. Sleep well.